Imagine it's 2029. Europe just declared emergency capital controls. ATMs in Rome are empty. French bond yields hit double digits. Your retirement portfolio, the one with safe European diversification, just dropped a third overnight. Sounds extreme? Every single thing I just described has already happened to at least one EU member state. The European Union, bigger economy than China, bigger population than the United States, 27 countries, 449 million people, one currency, and a fertility rate of 1.18. The divorce bill? North of 13 trillion euros, and nobody's filed the paperwork yet. But don't take my word for it. Just look at the numbers piling up right now. Right now, Europe is caught in 3 simultaneous crises, and they feed on each other. Its factories are closing. Volkswagen just announced 35,000 job cuts, the first plant closures in the company's 87-year history. Its people are disappearing. The EU will lose 29 million working-age adults by 2050. Italy is posting the lowest birth rate in its history, and Europe's share of the global economy has collapsed from over 25% to just 16% in a single generation. The Draghi report, written by the man who literally saved the euro in 2012, now says Europe needs 800 billion euros a year in new investment just to stay competitive. That's more than the entire Marshall Plan, every single year, indefinitely, and nobody knows where the money's coming from. And if you think this stays in Europe, it doesn't. When the EU sneezes, your 401k catches pneumonia. Europe is America's largest trade partner, NATO's backbone, and the second pillar of the global financial system. If it buckles, the shockwave hits every portfolio, every alliance, and every gas pump on the planet. What you're watching isn't decline. It's a slow-motion structural failure, designed in 1992, detonated in 2010, and still unfolding today. To understand how Europe got here, you have to go back to the worst idea 2 Frenchmen ever had over a glass of cognac. On May 9, 1950, French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman, a man born in Luxembourg, raised under German rule in Lorraine, who only became French when the borders shifted after World War I, stood in the Salon de l'Horloge at the Quai d'Orsay in Paris and read a declaration. He didn't write it. It was drafted by Jean Monnet, a cognac merchant's son who never held elected office in his life. The pitch was beautiful. Quote, "The solidarity in production thus established will make it plain that any war between France and Germany becomes not merely unthinkable, but materially impossible." And it was sold as peace. But the contract was economic control. The European Coal and Steel Community, signed into treaty on April 18, 1951, gave France oversight of Germany's Ruhr Valley, the industrial engine that had powered 2 world wars. Italy and Belgium got protection for their weaker industries. 6 countries signed up for a peace project. What they actually signed was a French leash on German industry. Integration through economics, not elections. That was Monnet's method, and it would define every step that followed. The Treaty of Rome followed in 1957. Commission President Jacques Delors pushed the Single European Act of 1986, calling it his finest achievement. A slim treaty with plenty of muscle and no fat. Each step, more integration. Each step, less democratic input. Monnet called his approach de facto solidarity. Create economic entanglement first, force political union later. And for 40 years it worked. Then, on November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, and everything changed. Chancellor Helmut Kohl announced a 10-point reunification plan, without consulting a single ally. French President François Mitterrand had, according to witnesses, quote, "a little fit of rage that went on for hours." The deal that emerged was enormous. France would not block German reunification if Germany killed the Deutsche Mark. The strongest currency in Europe sacrificed on the altar of French anxiety. Karl Otto Perl, the president of the Bundesbank, Germany's central bank, wasn't even consulted. He later said, "I was convinced it wouldn't come for another 100 years." The Maastricht Treaty, signed February 7, 1992, created the euro, and Kohl himself, the man who signed it, warned the Bundestag, and this is a direct quote, "The idea of sustaining economic and monetary union over time without political union is a fallacy." He said that, out loud, on the record. Then he signed it anyway. Now, the economists weren't just worried, they were screaming. Harvard's Martin Feldstein wrote in Foreign Affairs in 1997 that a single currency would impose different levels of unemployment on different members because high unemployment countries could not recover their competitiveness through currency devaluation. Paul de Grauw, one of Europe's top monetary economists, noted that visionary European politicians brushed aside the warnings from economists. The academic consensus, Mundell, Krugman, Bayumi, Eichengreen, overwhelmingly concluded the Eurozone was not an optimal currency area. The politicians knew. They gambled that the currency would force political union later. It didn't. So they built a currency union without a country behind it, a central bank without a treasury, a fixed exchange rate for economies that move at completely different speeds. What could possibly go wrong? Here's something most people don't realize about the euro. It's not neutral. According to the IMF, the euro is systematically undervalued for Germany and overvalued for Italy by roughly 15 to 20%. Let that sink in. Germany gets a permanent export subsidy baked into the currency. Italy gets a permanent export tax. Same currency, same central bank. Built-in wealth transfer. Germany's cumulative trade surplus since the euro launched, $3 trillion, most of it at the expense of its own Eurozone partners. And Italy's cumulative GDP growth over that same period, 25 years since adopting the euro, exactly 0. The euro isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed, just not for everyone. To understand the mechanism, you need to know one economics concept that explains everything: the impossible trinity, also called the Mundell-Fleming trilemma. Here's the simple version. Any country can only have two of three things: free capital movement, a fixed exchange rate, and independent monetary policy. Think of it this way. It's like saying you want to eat whatever you want, never exercise, and stay thin. Pick two. You can't have all three. Eurozone members chose free capital movement and a fixed exchange rate. They sacrificed independent monetary policy. Before the euro, when Italy's economy fell behind Germany's, it devalued the lira. Between 1975 and 1996, the lira lost 73% of its value against the Deutsche Mark. Those devaluations were ugly, inflationary, and painful, but they were a pressure valve. The euro welded that valve shut. When the euro launched, something extraordinary happened. Greek 10-year bond yields, which had been well into double digits in the 1990s, plummeted to near German levels of around 4% by 2001. Markets looked at a Greek government bond and a German government bond and said, same currency, same risk. They weren't. You'd think the markets would have seen this coming. They didn't. The Maastricht Treaty explicitly included a no bailout clause. Markets ignored it. Southern European governments and banks gorged on cheap credit. Germany did the opposite. Through the Hartz reforms in the early 2000s, Germany held wages down so aggressively that its unit labor costs rose 20 to 30% less than its competitors. German exports boomed on an artificially cheap currency. The current account went from slightly negative in 1999 to a surplus of 8.5% of GDP by 2015, the world's largest. As Paul Krugman put it, Germany didn't run a surplus at all in the 90s. Its big move came with the introduction of the euro. The result? German banks lent Southern Europeans the money to buy German products. Economist Paul de Grauw called it somewhat like a car company that lends consumers the money to buy their cars, a highly risky affair. By 2011, Germany's cumulative current account surplus with the Eurozone hit 634 billion euros. The bomb detonated in October 2009. Newly elected Greek Prime Minister George Papandreou stood up and revealed the real budget deficit, 12.5% of GDP, 4 times the EU limit. But the seeds had been planted years earlier. In 2002, Greece had concluded a swap deal with Goldman Sachs, using fictitious exchange rates to hide up to $1 billion in debt from official EU statistics. It let Greece meet the Maastricht criteria on paper while kicking the real liabilities into the future. Markets panicked. Greek 10-year yields exploded past 44% by early 2012. 3 bailouts followed. 110 billion euros in 2010, 130 billion in 2012, including the largest sovereign debt restructuring in history, a 53.5% haircut on 197 billion in bonds, and 86 billion more in 2015. Total, over 260 billion euros. Now do the math on where that money actually went. Studies found less than 10% reached the Greek government. The vast majority flowed straight back to private creditors, French banks, German banks. It was a bailout of Northern European finance laundered through Athens. And if you think the price was just financial, it wasn't. The human cost was staggering. Greece lost 27% of its GDP, comparable to the American Great Depression. Unemployment hit 27.9%. Youth unemployment peaked at roughly 60%. In Spain, 55% of people under 25 couldn't find work. A study published in the British Medical Journal found that austerity triggered a 35.7% surge in suicides in Greece after June 2011. And while Greeks were dying, Germany was profiting. The Leibniz Institute for Economic Research found that the flight of investors into safe German bonds saved Germany over 100 billion euros in borrowing costs. The crisis killed Greeks and subsidized Germans. Same union, same currency, same family. But what happened next should really keep you up at night. In November 2011, Papandreou announced he would hold a referendum. Let the people decide whether to accept the bailout terms. He was summoned to Cannes and subjected to what witnesses described as a humiliating dressing down by Merkel, Sarkozy, Lagarde, and Juncker. He cancelled the referendum. He resigned. He was replaced by Lucas Papademos, a former ECB vice president, unelected. Days later in Rome, Berlusconi was replaced by Mario Monti, a former European commissioner, also unelected. Some commentators called it a veritable EU-led coup d'etat, but the most devastating example came in July 2015. The Syriza party won the Greek election on an anti-austerity platform. Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras held a referendum. 61.3% voted no to creditor terms. 61% said no. The majority voted, and it didn't matter. 1 week later, Tsipras capitulated and signed a deal with even harsher conditions than the ones his people had just rejected. Finance Minister Yanis Varoufakis, who described the bailout as fiscal waterboarding, resigned. Greece's debt repayment schedule now extends past 2060. The pain was sold as a necessary cure for lazy southern spendthrifts. But the doctors administering the medicine weren't neutral. They were the very banks that caused the disease. Now rewind to July 26, 2012, before the Syriza showdown, before the referendums. ECB President Mario Draghi said 8 words that stopped the crisis cold. Whatever it takes to preserve the euro, and believe me, it will be enough. Bond yields collapsed overnight. The ECB announced the OMT program, a promise to buy unlimited government bonds. It was never actually used. The threat alone was enough. But 12 years later, that same Mario Draghi wrote a 383-page report saying Europe now faces an existential challenge. The man who saved the euro says the patient is dying anyway. The savior became the coroner. Hey, quick question for the comments. If you were running Italy right now, would you fight to stay in the euro or start printing lira? Drop your answer below. Because while Draghi was buying time, 4 new crises were loading. In July 2020, EU leaders agreed to something that had been unthinkable for decades: joint borrowing. NextGenerationEU, 807 billion euros in common debt. The first time the EU issued shared bonds at scale. The Commission became the world's largest green bond issuer overnight. By mid-2025, 378 billion had been dispersed. And here's the thing: the southern economies, Portugal, Italy, Greece and Spain, received 78% of the funds, despite contributing only 28% of GDP. Was this, finally, fiscal union? Northern Europe said absolutely not. Germany's finance minister, Christian Lindner, immediately blocked any further proposals. One-time deal, emergency only, never again. But the debt must be repaid by 2058, and nobody has decided whether to roll it over or pay it back. Roll it over and you get permanent joint debt, fiscal union through the back door. Exactly what Monnet designed the system to produce. Don't roll it over and the payments become another austerity trigger. Sound familiar? Then Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24, 2022, and detonated Germany's entire economic model. Germany had been importing 65% of its natural gas from Russia. Cheap Russian energy was the hidden subsidy that made Made in Germany competitive globally. When that tap turned off, TTF gas prices spiked to 316 euros per megawatt hour, 20 times the pre-crisis norm. The EU pivoted hard. US gas imports surged from 19 billion cubic meters to over 45 billion. Norwegian imports climbed from 80 to 91 billion. Russia's share dropped from 45% to 19%, but the damage was structural, not temporary. European industrial electricity now costs 2 to 3 times the US rate and 2.5 times China's. Germany's economy contracted in both 2023 and 2024. The chemical sector, the backbone of German manufacturing, reported capacity utilization of just 72%, a 30-year low. BASF permanently closed production lines at Ludwigshafen, its historic home, and is investing 10 billion euros in a new complex in Guangdong, China. Volkswagen, first factory closures in 87 years, 35,000 German jobs cut, 2.5 billion invested in Hefei, China. Bosch, 7,000 cuts. Ford Saarlouis, closed. Continental, Schaeffler, ZF, tens of thousands more. Germany has lost 272,000 industrial jobs since 2019. Not a single industrial sector recorded employment growth. Let that sink in, not one. But Europe isn't just losing competitiveness, it's losing people. Remember that maternity ward in Taranto from the opening? It's not an outlier, it's the future. The EU's total fertility rate hit 1.38 in 2023, a record low and far below the 2.1 replacement rate. Italy, 1.18. Spain, 1.12. Malta, 1.06. Even France, long Europe's demographic exception, fell to 1.62, its lowest since the end of World War I. To put that in terms you can feel, for every 10 European women of childbearing age, They're having roughly 6 fewer children than needed just to keep the population stable. Eurostat projects the EU's working age population will shrink by 29 million by 2050. A million workers vanishing every year. Italy's population could fall 52% by 2100 without migration. The old age dependency ratio is heading towards 60% by the end of this century, fewer than 2 workers per retiree. For comparison, the US sits at 28%, China at 20%, India at 11%. Europe is aging faster than any competitor on Earth. Without immigration, Germany's population would shrink from 83 million to roughly 52 million by 2100, a 37% decline. But immigration is political dynamite, fueling the very Eurosceptic parties that threaten to tear the Union apart. This is where the trap snaps shut. The EU can't reform. Fiscal union requires German taxpayers to permanently subsidize southern pensions, and no German politician can survive that vote. The Common Deposit Insurance Scheme, proposed in 2015, still doesn't exist a decade later. Macron's proposals for a Eurozone budget went nowhere. Only 11% of Draghi's 170 recommendations had been implemented by September 2025. The EU can't break up. A UBS analysis estimated the first-year cost at 9,500 to 11,500 euros per person for a departing weak country, 40 to 50% of GDP, with the warning that almost no modern fiat currency unions have broken up without some form of authoritarian or military government or civil war. The only country that tried to leave, the UK, is projected to lose 6 to 8% of GDP permanently, and Britain wasn't even in the Eurozone. And the EU can't stay the same. It needs 800 billion a year in investment it doesn't have, while losing 1 million workers annually. So what happens when you can't go forward, can't go back, and can't stand still? Someone eventually does the math. Let's do the math. Eurozone government debt, 13.3 trillion euros as of 2024. That's the number in the title, and here's who owes what. Greece, 149.7% of GDP. Italy, 137.8%. France, 117.7%. Belgium, 107.1%. Spain, 103.2%. Cross-border euro-denominated contracts that would face legal chaos in a breakup. 20 trillion euros, documented by economists Nordvig and Ferruzzi. Then there's Germany's Target 2 claims. Think of these as IOUs at a poker table where Germany keeps winning but nobody ever settles up. And the IOUs are only good as long as nobody leaves the game. As of October 2025, Germany is owed 1.047 trillion euros through the ECB's internal settlement system. It peaked at 1.269 trillion in December 2022. If a country leaves the Eurozone, those IOUs become unrecoverable. Here is the kicker. France, not Italy, not Greece, is now the biggest fiscal risk. With 117.7% debt to GDP and a deficit over 5%, the spread between French and German 10-year bonds hit 57.1 basis points in February 2026. S&P and Fitch have already downgraded. The Stability and Growth Pact, the rules that were supposed to prevent this, has been a dead letter since France and Germany themselves violated it first, without consequences. The referees broke their own rules. Now picture the worst case. If Italy, 2.8 trillion euros in debt, 137.8% of GDP, zero cumulative growth since adopting the euro, were to leave and redenominate, LSE economists estimate the new lira would devalue 30%, pushing debt to GDP to 160% and making default virtually certain. Italy's 536 billion in Target 2 liabilities would become unrecoverable. Contagion would hit Spain, Portugal, and Greece within hours. The ING model projects a 12% cumulative output drop across the Eurozone in the first 2 years. For perspective, when Argentina abandoned its peso-dollar peg in 2002, an eerily similar setup of a weaker economy locking its currency to a stronger one, GDP fell 20%. Unemployment exceeded 20%. Inflation hit 72%. And Argentina was one country. The Eurozone is 21. The total? Conservative estimates put total assets, contracts, and GDP at risk somewhere between 13 and 20 trillion euros. That's not a divorce. That's a mutual suicide pact disguised as a marriage. So is there a way out? 3 scenarios, none of them are good. Remember those 3 doors: reform, breakup, status quo? Let's crack each one open. Scenario 1, fiscal union. The optimists bet. Full integration, permanent Eurobonds, common deposit insurance, a European treasury with real taxing and spending power. And there are signs it's starting. The NextGenerationEU fund cracked the door open. Germany's March 2025 constitutional amendment, scrapping the debt brake for a €500 billion infrastructure and defence fund, was seismic. The Rearm Europe plan adds another €150 billion in shared defence borrowing. European defence spending has surged 80% above pre-war levels. A 2-speed Europe is now being actively discussed. The E6 group, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, and Poland, leading deeper integration while others follow at their own pace. Probability? Low, but rising. The political will only ever materializes in crisis, and Europe has never had a shortage of those. Scenario 2. Slow fragmentation. The realists bet. No formal breakup, just a gradual hollowing out. Demographic decline shrinks the tax base. Industrial relocation to the US and China accelerates. Far-right parties, the AfD at 25% in Germany, having officially adopted EU exit at their January 2025 party congress, the FPO at 35% in Austria, National Rally at 31% in France, keep gaining without quite taking power. The brain drain accelerates. The European Commission identified 46 regions stuck in a talent development trap, with another 36 at risk. That's 30% of the EU's population living in areas bleeding their best and brightest. The EU becomes a regulatory body managing decline, like the Holy Roman Empire in its final centuries, technically existing, functionally irrelevant. Scenario 3. A shock exit. The tail risk. A severe recession tips Italy or another major economy past the political breaking point. Capital controls, bank runs, emergency redenomination. The Argentine scenario, but continent-wide. The ECB's transmission protection instrument, introduced in July 2022 to buy bonds of distressed countries, remains untested. Its activation criteria are vague and politically fraught. It's a fire extinguisher that's never been tested, in a building made of wood. Now, before the doom spiral locks in completely, the collapse thesis has to answer 3 things. First, public support is surging, not collapsing. Support for the euro is at 74%, an all-time record. Trust in the EU hit 52%, the highest since 2007. Among 15 to 24-year-olds, 59% trust the institution. If the project is dying, its citizens haven't noticed, or they're clinging to it precisely because the alternatives are worse. Second, Southern Europe is currently outperforming the North. Greece grew 2.3% in 2024, the fastest in the EU. Spain and Portugal are running budget surpluses. Italian bonds are outperforming French bonds for the first time. The countries that were supposed to be the weakest links are, right now, the strongest. Third, the EU keeps deepening, not splintering. The Eurozone added Croatia in 2023 and Bulgaria in 2026. 21 members now. Joint debt, defence cooperation, the digital euro project. Integration is accelerating, not retreating. Brexit may have actually helped by removing the EU's most reluctant member. The patient may be sicker than the polls suggest, or the polls may know something the doomers don't. So where does that leave you? Watching the most ambitious political experiment in human history either transform or unravel in real time. Jean Monnet, the cognac merchant's son who designed all of this, once said, "Europe will be forged in crises and will be the sum of the solutions adopted for those crises." He meant it as reassurance. Increasingly, it reads like a warning. And if you haven't seen our deep dive into the Federal Reserve's trillion-dollar trap, the experiment that can never end, check it out. Links on screen. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your prediction in the comments. Fiscal union, slow decay, or shock exit?